Everybody, welcome to my blog. I have a very special guest today, a guy who's had a big effect on my life and a big effect on lots of people that I'm close with too. And it's Brian Phillips. And Brian, you're joining us from Australia. And so before we even talk about what I want to talk about today, just kind of tell people what you're doing out in Australia, where you are, and just kind of what led you there.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm in Brisbane, Australia. I work with a group called Campus Outreach. Moved out here about 2.5 years ago for lots of reasons. But the biggest was because I really wanted to use my life in the best way possible. One of the things I'm committed to is to maximizing resources for the nations. And I feel like moving our family out here to Brisbane was by far the best way I could do that.
So what's it like? I mean, moving a family, you have 3 kids, soon to be 4, you're in the adoption process now. What's it like for you to kind of have that added responsibility on top of the responsibility just going abroad with such a big purpose of, increasing resources for the nations?
In some ways, it's not as different as you might think, Jim. I mean, I think our life looks incredibly similar here in Brisbane than it did back when I was living in Birmingham. I mean, we still wake up, we still eat breakfast, we still have some morning worship as a family. The kids go to school, we go to work, and so it looks incredibly similar. But I do think the thing that has been the most helpful thing for me to realize is, what am I really living for? Because I think when you get out of your native environment, it really helps you to evaluate your priorities, and as well as when you come across other people who have different value system, then it challenges you to ask questions like, okay, is this really what I want to be committed to? Is this really worth sacrificing for? And so those are some of the differences. But by and large, moving to Brisbane has been a great move for our family, and a great move in general for the gospel. So we're really glad to be here.
All right, so you mentioned the gospel, which, obviously is a focal point, a purpose that has driven you to where you're sitting right now. And what I want to talk about today is just what I've seen you display here in America. You're now displaying it abroad, but that is this focus on multiplication versus addition, and just the opportunity to just really invest in people. And through investing in people, trying to then have effect indirectly on other people through those people you're investing in. And I just think it's a great thing for people to hear about, because to me, it's the ultimate use of time in an exponential manner. So just kind of talk about that philosophy.
Yeah, I mean, Jim, I think you and I share the same passion in that we hate to see things wasted, whether it's people's physical bodies or their time or their resources, whatever. I just hate to see things wasted. And so when I was in college, a guy sat down with me and basically asked me that question: what are you going to give your life to? You're going to give it to something. What's it going to be? And then the other question that he really challenged me with was, are you just going to spend your life, or are you going to invest it? And I never really thought in those terms before. But what he did is he sat down, we're sitting there at the table, and he started talking about the difference between addition and multiplication. And, I didn't come from a great school, but I kind of thought I knew where he was going here. But what he did is he brought out a napkin, and he said, Brian, imagine if this napkin was 1/1000th of an inch thick. So it took 1,000 napkins piled on top of each other to make an inch. He said, okay, tear this napkin apart and then stack them on top of each other. And then he said, okay, tear it in half again, stack them on top. So you've done it twice. You've got 4/1000ths of an inch. I mean, it's tiny. And he said, keep doing it as many times as you can. So I think, I did it 7 or 8 times. And he said, okay, you can stop there, because I had just a wad of paper in front of me. But he said, all right, if you could keep doing that 50 times, and you could keep, tearing the napkin apart, stack it on top, each time it doubles. If you could do that 50 times, how tall do you think your stack of napkin paper would be? And we're sitting in a pretty big room, and I was like, I don't know, at least as tall as this room. He said, okay, what if I told you there would actually be 17 million miles high? And that would be enough for 34 round trips of the moon. Jim, my mouth hit the floor. I mean, I literally did not believe him. And then he goes on to talk about the difference between, taking a penny a week. He said, imagine if I could offer you a penny a week and that amount would double every week. Or I could give you $10,000 every single day. What would you take? If a penny a week doubled every week over the course of a year, it would be worth over $100 trillion. And so, to me, it just got me thinking, okay, what are the ways that I can really invest my life and really see a multiplicative return rather than just spend it in ways that most of what I had grown up, that's most of my models had done.
Man.
So, yeah, that's just a couple of illustrations, but that was pretty powerful for me. It got me thinking about, okay, what am I gonna invest my life in? And that conversation has significantly affected the way I make decisions.
Well, I'll tell you, it's a great illustration for a lot of people here, and I'm laughing because I remember the first time you did that illustration for me, and it always has resonated with me, the idea of spending versus investing. And of course, my generation, especially our generation, we're all about spending, and we think later about investing, right? And
Right.
I'm the first to say, I've had to learn the hard way in a lot of those things. But once you start to learn how to invest, it's amazing to see the dividends. And we're talking financial terms, but man, when you talk about this in time terms, finances is just a byproduct, just one
That's
of
right.
several byproducts of time. And so just
That's
kind
right.
of thinking about time and how we can invest time versus spending time. Why don't you just give some examples of just ways that you've seen the ability to directly affect a life or lives, but then indirectly affect so many more, all with the same thing that affected you, the gospel.
Yeah. Well, in that same conversation where the guy's talking about multiplication, he basically just explains that Jesus came to earth and he had a relatively short amount of time to invest. He only had 3 years, if you think about it, of ministry time. And if you look at all the history, what's been recorded for us is he spent the majority of his time with 12 guys. And it almost seems like he was missing something. I mean, he could have been an amazing author. He could have drawn the biggest crowds. He could have done all kinds of things. But he spends his time with these 12 guys. But you start to look at it, and it really makes sense that the reason he spent so much time with those guys is because he was so in love with the world. And he really did believe that was the best way that he could influence the world. And so that's really what I've tried to model my life after, Jim. And just really trying to always, wherever I am, picking people that I can pour my life into, help them mature to the point where they're able to reproduce themselves into other people. And I think that maturity is a really important piece to multiplication that we forget about a lot. We get really excited about the numbers and excited about, yeah, we're going to invest. But the reality is, babies don't have babies. You got to grow up before you can reproduce, and it's the same with your life. If you're focusing on multiplication, you can't just focus on the end product. You also have to focus on the method. How that's really going to happen, how you're really going to help somebody grow to that point of maturity. And so that's what I love doing. That's what I spend a lot of my time doing. And and I think that concept of parenting has been really helpful for me. I mean, Jim, you're about to have another kid, and yeah, that's right. And so it's you're seeing firsthand. It's not always easy. Usually, it's very sacrificial on your part. But Jim, as those kids are growing up, and you're kind of seeing the world through their lens, you want nothing else than to help them mature to the point where they're able to have a positive influence in the world. And so that's what we're talking about, is taking responsibility for people that are around us in the same way you're taking responsibility for your kids.
Yeah.
And I really believe if we could do that more and more, it would be the absolute best use of time that we could possibly come up with.
All right, so I have a question on that. You don't choose your kids. God blesses you with children. But
Yeah.
when we're out in the world, you kind of have to be strategic on the person or people you choose to pour into, because you only have so much time.
That's right. Yeah.
And so, talk about that, kind of your ability to get around men and figure out, all right, who's hungry, and not necessarily push away the others, but really
Yep.
find the right guy to pour into. Because I think, me included, a lot of people struggle with that. And if you try to just meet with everybody all the time, it's not going to happen. It's just not going to happen. So talk about that aspect.
Yeah, I mean, there's obviously you're constantly evaluating. Is this the best way I can use this resource that God's provided for me? And so, three things that I tend to look for are one is a guy faithful? Is he willing to follow through on commitments? That's really important to me. Second is he available? There's some people who they're willing to follow through, but they're just so busy. You really can't spend time with them. And if somebody's not available, there's not a whole lot you can offer in that season of their life. It's best to just say, look, why don't you go ahead and follow through on your present commitments and call me later and we'll reevaluate. And so faithful, available, and then teachable is the last important thing. Yeah, I think that if somebody, like you said, is really hungry, they're going to grow. And so if somebody's teachable, then they're just going to be like a sponge, and they're just going to soak it up. And when you find those three ingredients in a person, you have the ingredients for a lot of growth to take place. And so that's what I look for. It's really interesting to even try to process that around the world. You live in the part of the country, in the part of the world where there are a lot of Christians, and that's where I grew up. Here in Brisbane, that's not the case at all. There's no social benefit to calling yourself a Christian, and so it really is interesting even to see how those dynamics shift a little bit once you're in a different environment.
Well, and that leads me on my last question, and I was going to ask you before you even said that, and you led into it perfectly. So you're in Brisbane, and there's no social value, as you said, to call yourself a Christian.
Yeah.
So when it comes to leader development or pouring into somebody or all the different types of cliches and terms you hear about that genre of spending time,
Yeah.
how do you get the point across that there's nothing more important that you could be talking about than this kind of stuff? How do you kind of challenge them on spending versus investing? Because even somebody who's not a believer, that's going to hit them because they're so used to talking about sports and video games and girls.
Right.
And how do you get them to understand there's nothing more important you could be talking about than at least knowing where you stand on this topic? Because that's the topic you're there to talk to them about.
Yeah, that's honestly one of the biggest challenges is getting people to not be entertained and distracted by the toys or the food or whatever is going to give them some temporary fix, and really get them to think long term about what's going to give them satisfaction. I mean, Jim, we live in a generation that's all about me and it's all about immediate gratification, and so it's a big challenge. And I think that is where a lot of the battle is fought is getting people just to really evaluate, to think through their decisions. And so that's why I think this concept is really huge. Talking about what are you living for? What are you going to be doing now that's going to give you a return, not just tomorrow or next week, but years and years from now. How can you really make the most of that? And so I think that what you're talking about right now is very valuable, and I hope a lot of people listen to you.
Well, I appreciate you joining me for this sit down, man, and it was great having you here, right here on my back porch at my new house just a month ago, and now you're all the way back there in Australia doing some awesome stuff for the kingdom, and can't wait to see you again soon. When are you coming back to the States?
Man, it's going to be a while. It's not cheap to get a big family over there, so we're pretty happy here. But bro, I got a great front porch right here that's calling your name. So bring your family over. We'll treat you right.
All right, you got it in recording now. I'll have to recruit some of our other friends over here, maybe make a trip out of it. But until then, man, thanks again for joining me, and we'll talk soon.
All right, sounds great. Thanks, Jim.